Can you explain what Janet Yellen means by extraordinary measures? Why are they extraordinary? So lots of conversation the last couple of weeks about the debt ceiling again, just to kind of define some terms and where this is coming from so that we're all on the same page. So every year for the last many decades, the federal government spends more money than it brings in. We have a budget deficit, meaning that the tax revenues that the federal government is bringing in on an annual basis is not enough to cover the amount that the federal government is spending on an annual basis. And the way that we bridge that gap is that the Treasury Department has to issue government bonds, essentially debt, in order to cover the difference, in order to cover the annual deficit. And so Congress authorizes the Treasury Department to issue bonds without having to come back and forth to them every time they need to issue bonds up to a certain limit. And that limit is known as the debt ceiling. And the debt ceiling has been around since back in World War I, where it was essentially a government efficiency, right? Rather than the Treasury Department having to come to the government every time they need to issue debt, Congress says, okay, well, we've authorized this spending and we authorize the Treasury Department to issue debt up to some given limit. And way back when that limit was set, it was set kind of like at a level that nobody thought we would hit or didn't think we would hit for a long time. This is in the news more and more lately because we are running larger deficits. We are adding to our national debt at a more accelerated pace. And so we're hitting up on this debt limit more and more frequently. There becomes this debate then in Congress. So just to kind of tell you like where the decision makers lie on this, Congress has the authority over government spending. They approve the annual budget, the omnibus bill that they just approved back in December that authorizes the spending for the year. They're also the ones that put the debt ceiling in place, and they are the ones who have to authorize raising the debt ceiling. So the debate isn't like nobody wants to default on the national debt. However, most fiscal conservatives, which is kind of how most Republicans identify, want to raise the debt ceiling in exchange for some agreement on reducing spending going forward so that we don't continue to add to the debt at this accelerated pace. Democrats, on the other hand, don't want to negotiate spending and just say we need to raise the debt ceiling because we already approved this spending and we need to pay for it. That's kind of a short version of kind of where the debate lies. Now, what do extraordinary measures mean? So Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary, who's basically, Congress authorizes the spending, but she is sort of in charge of overseeing that all the bills get paid. You could kind of think of her as like if you are your household CFO, that's kind of her role. So think about what happens in your house if you have, say, a credit card and your credit card is maxed out. You have to then take measures in order to make sure your spending fits within the limits of the cash flow that you are bringing in every month. That's essentially what she means by extraordinary measures, meaning that it can't be business as usual because the Treasury Department can't issue more debt to cover spending as usual. So she has to go through the line items of the federal government and decide what can we hold off on funding without triggering any type of default or things like that. And how long of a runway is that going to give me before I reach a point where I have to issue debt or I'm going to default? So her extraordinary measures that she has kind of outlined are basically not funding government pensions. So if you have a TSP through various government agencies like the Postal Service, like federal workers, they are holding off on making contributions to your retirement benefits and your retirement plans and basically kind of saying, okay, that's going to be an IOU. And so this is something else that happens, right? Like eventually that has to be funded at some point in the future. So even once the debt ceiling gets raised, you're going to have to catch up on all of that. So it's not like it's never going to happen. They're just like putting it off until they have authorization to issue more spending. Another thing that happens too is that and this is something I think that people don't talk about a lot, like they talk about the fact that foreign governments hold U.S. Treasury bonds, but the single collective largest holder of U.S. Treasury bonds is actually all of us. It's actually people in those government retirement plans. It's people relying on Social Security. So Social Security, like the trust fund that funds all those pension benefits, various TSP plans, major pension funds, not just like federal pension funds, but state pension funds, many of your 401ks, all hold US Treasury bonds. And so one of the other things that they're doing is they're saying, okay, the bonds that come due, because when the government issues Treasury bonds, they have a expiration date, at which point the government has to issue new debt to pay off the old debt. You can kind of think of it a little bit like refinancing your mortgage. And so what they're saying is like, okay, well, on the accounts that we have control over, those bonds that come due for repayment, we're just not going to repay them. We're basically going to make like an IOU. And so that is giving her the ability to limit the cash outflows and the need to issue more debt. And she's saying that's going to give her a runway of about 5 months. So that gives Congress until, call it May or June, to come to some sort of agreement and raise the debt ceiling. And then it would kind of go back to business as usual in the Treasury Department. So I hope that that helps and answers the question a little bit. But I would liken it to if you are, spending more money than you make every month in your household and you've maxed out your credit card and you can no longer do that, you start to go through your budget and figure out like, okay, what can I eliminate or put off until I can, bring in more funds or raise more debt? And so how can I live within my means in the current environment for some period of time? You can't do that forever. At some point, you either have to, lower your spending or make more money. Or, if you can't continue to issue more and more debt forever and ever. So I hope that that helps and explains it a little bit, but it's largely the way she's like and the reason it's called extraordinary is because it's not business as usual. And the specific measures that she's talking about taking is basically holding off on funding and reimbursing federally sponsored retirement plans. So I hope that that helps and gives some insights there.